Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing so well today, Tim. This episode, this conversation that is coming up features a story that, while on the surface feels like it's going to be this hard-boiled true crime story about a prison break, but turns into the story about two individuals who never met each other, weirdly enough, getting to know each other and discovering things about certain aspects of themselves that they didn't know existed. I find it incredibly fascinating and can't wait to hear what the listeners think about it, Tim, but I personally can't wait to hear how you are today.
I am doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And this is an episode that was originally released on Missing on June 8th, 2023. I am very excited to introduce this conversation that we had with Chief Geoff Britton. And he tells us all about the story of William Leslie Arnold, who killed his parents when he was 16 years old in 1958 and was sent to prison, escaped prison in 1967, and then, well, I guess you're going to have to listen to hear some more of the specifics, but he traveled the world, didn't he, Lance?
He sure did, and Chief Britton followed him for a number of years, becoming a bit obsessed with this escapee, and again, learning a lot about this person, and it became a story about not only the prison break, but Geoff's journey as well.
Well, I think this conversation is kind of timely, Lance, because we recently spoke with Laura Risti about William Bradford Bishop, who killed his family and went on the run. And during that conversation, we also spoke about John List, who did the same thing. And you kind of hear about how some of these fugitives sort of evade capture. And this story's really much more unique, I would say, because of what he did with his life.
And what he did with his life sort of proves to you that the crime that he committed had a lot more to it than just maybe a spoiled kid getting upset at his parents for not being able to borrow the car. There was something deeper going on there that was not put out there to the public because, again, like you said, what he did with his life after he escaped prison is completely contrary to what you would expect someone in that position to be like.
And it's really interesting to look at the pictures of William Leslie Arnold through the years, when he was a kid first in the 50s and then as an older adult in Australia. So make sure to check out our social media pages for pictures of him. You can find that at Missing CSM.
And we're going to take a quick break right now for a commercial, and we will be back with Chief Geoff Britton and his story about the escaped inmate William Leslie Arnold.
Welcome to the podcast, Geoff Britton. Geoff, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us and taking the time to speak about this really cool story that you have regarding an escapee.
No, I appreciate that. It's a long road.
Yeah, this is amazing. But you are also the chief. You're Chief Britton, and for those who don't know you, can you fill in the listeners as to your background and who you are?
Of course. So my name is Geoff Britton. My current position is I'm the chief of the Office of Law Enforcement Support in Sacramento, California, for the state of California. And I oversee investigations of institutions within the State Department of Health and Human Services. But before that, I was an investigator for the state of Nebraska Department of Correctional Services.
And has law always been in the family? Is this something that has been passed down through generations?
No, I do have family members that were in law enforcement. They retired from their careers. So it's been part of our family in different forms, but it was my interest and I pursued it.
Very cool. And while in Nebraska, you were looking into a cold case. Is that right?
Yes. So in 2004, I started with the department a few years before that, but in 2004, I asked if I could look at some of the cold cases, and I never thought I'd find one so much before my time, literally before my lifetime. So there's a fugitive in question that escaped in 1967 from the Nebraska State Penitentiary.
And you said that you wanted to find out more about escapees. What was it that started the process? Were you always interested in this because of your position, or was there something that kind of sparked something?
Well, in 2003, about that same time, 2004, there was escape from a facility in the state of Nebraska, and that person was quickly apprehended. But it made me think of what it took to escape from a prison and what the impact would be if you're on the run for a long period of time. So that got my interest in escapes, just in general, and then to realize that the department I even worked for had one of such length that was unresolved.
Is this one that we're about to talk about, was that the only one that was unresolved?
No, there was some others that were walkaways from work release program or parole absconders, but nothing of this magnitude, especially from a secured institution such as the Nebraska State Penitentiary.
And how did you find this case?
I asked for a roster of any escape cases, and number one was this escape in itself, just because of the age of it.
I'd like to imagine the reaction of the person you asked for a roster of escapees. Is this something that is common for someone in your position to look into?
Well, as an investigator for the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, we were assigned many different topics. It could be drug trafficking, it could be employee misconduct, it could be all sorts of things. Since we were assigned a variety of investigations, I don't think it was an odd request per se, but it was definitely one that they had to go in to get some records and basically dust them off because it was just so old.
Okay, and you said something before that piqued a little bit of my interest. You said that there are some parole absconders, which I know what that is, but then you said there's these walkaways.
Sure.
And is that literally like they walked away from like a furlough or something?
Exactly right, and you're spot on. So when inmates get classified by security levels and programming processes, they can get to work release. And work release is a center. It's one of the facilities within the Department of Corrections that you can be housed there at night, and you can go to a job during the day, or depending on your programming. And so you're free to go to your job during the day in the community. So you're in the community, but you have to be back by a certain time. There's certain rules and regulations that surround it. But if you don't come back, you in essence, quote unquote, walked away. And then you would get a warrant to get picked up, and then they would get brought back to the Department of Corrections for processing. So it's not as in that case, it's not as an over the fence type escape. This person could have been out at a job and just decided, I'm not going back.
And that's something you had worked on.
There was a handful over the years. It's been a while since I worked on walkaway cases or absconders for that matter.
I can't think of prison escapes without thinking of Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, that's you can think of Shawshank, Escape from Alcatraz, just the classic prison escape movies. But there's just other versions of like escape, a walkaway, and absconders, but they all exist.
Is Nebraska pretty high security? You said with the level of security for Nebraska, is that one of like the top in the country?
There's maximum security facilities within Nebraska, of course, Nebraska State Penitentiary being one of them. So it's just different security protocols, of course.
And the case that we're going to talk about today, this is involving a murderer who escaped prison. Can you tell us a little bit about this case?
This inmate was sentenced to state penitentiary in Lincoln, Nebraska for murdering his parents in 1958.
And he was William Leslie Arnold at that time.
Correct. So William Leslie Arnold in 1958 murdered his parents surrounding a conversation over the use of the family vehicle to go on a date. Obviously, I think there's much more to that interaction, but nonetheless, that's the conversation that took place at the time of the incident. And as a result, he was ultimately convicted and sent to the Nebraska State Penitentiary to serve out his sentence. So there was a period of time that he murdered his parents. He did bury them in the backyard. And then he carried on and he told people that his parents went to look for a grandparent, take care of another family member, and his little brother was taken care of by someone else. And that went on for about 10, 11 days, as I recall, from my readings. And then ultimately he was confronted about the location of his parents. And that's when he ultimately confessed and took authorities to where he buried them in the backyard, and that those photos have been listed in the newspaper or shown in the newspapers and other spots.
Right. And the whole tipping point for Arnold was the fact that he wasn't able to borrow his parents' car to go on a date. And you had a really interesting statement there where you're like, there's more to it. I mean, has to be.
You would think there would have to be. I don't know what his life at home was like. There's been conversations surrounding the fact that maybe he was abused or not treated well by the family, but nothing obviously I can show or prove. But when you come down to it, if you get asked to use the family car to go on a date, obviously murder is not the response for a denial of that request. So I just always felt that there has to be more to that. Or maybe it was a tipping point of other things going on between him and his parents or him and his mother, that was the icing on the cake for other issues. I don't know. I don't think any of us will truly know that answer.
And nothing like that was used in his defense, like self-defense or abuse or anything like that?
No, not from what I've read about the case. He pretty much he immediately took responsibility. Well, immediately once confronted, of course, and then he shared with what he'd done and where he put them, and shared his version, and then he ended up going off to prison.
How did he get caught?
So it looks like the story kind of looks like it fell apart over time, where the parents were. He tried to carry on as much as his normal life as possible, but ultimately, people not realizing where the parents were. It's my understanding that the police and the grandparents, that the story he told to go look for the grandparents or grandfather, they ended up coming to town, and then with the police, they confronted him.
And not to get salacious into, graphic details, but what was the nature of the murders? Was it something that looked like a frenzied killing, or was it more kind of calculated?
I never saw actual crime scene photos. I saw crime scene photos of the location, but I've never seen crime scene photos of his parents or bodies of any kind. But he did commit the crime by use of a rifle, shooting both parents, and ultimately, in the days to follow, burying them in the yard.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm not condoning this crime in any means, but we recently spoke about somebody who killed their entire family with a hammer, who had the option to kill them with a gun because he had a weapon in the house, but he chose to buy a hammer, go to a hardware store, and then come back and killed them with the hammer. And
Right.
and there's like, what was it, 4 members of his family, which is insane. It's just like so when you say a rifle, I'm thinking, all right, like I could see a kid 16 years old, maybe was abused, maybe there was something else going on, snaps, like this whole temporary insanity type.
Right. And I don't disagree that something else was going on. And I think he probably presented the firearm to maybe give the impression to his mother that, he is a young man, he's not a kid, and shows this weapon. And then in that interaction ends up shooting her. Again, not condoning it, of course. We just don't know what that true interaction was that led to her being shot initially. There is quotes of her having said to him, at least in old court documents, as I recall, she goes, "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" Right beforehand.
Wow, that's pretty eerie. How long did he spend in prison?
Approximately 8 years. So he went went to jail immediately, but ultimately, 1959, he escaped in 1967, maybe 8 to 9 years. He escaped with another inmate in July 14th, 1967.
And what was the escape like?
So from what we've pieced together, it looks like a former parolee that had paroled earlier in the year, participated in it and arranged for items to be thrown over the fence, possibly masks to assist with inmate count periods to make sure everyone gets accounted for, and then also communicated through the use of classified ads in the local paper, because obviously none of the technologies that we enjoy today existed then. And classified ads were used to describe the date of, and they were in the ad, and it said NOF, ended up being related to Night of Freedom, July 14th, 1967. And that's ultimately the date they went over the fence.
Well, that's something I never heard before. Jeez, was that something that's common, so a prisoner used a classified ad to try to find someone on the outside?
Well, not necessarily that. So it's a parolee from the same prison that released in the months prior to the escape. They may have had conversations planning in advance, and that's how they would communicate. In the meantime, is through the use of classified ads. And when I went through some of the classified ads, you would find ads commonly at that time of, driving from Omaha to Denver, anybody interested in sharing fuel expenses. And so it was almost like the electronic media that we see today, or how do we sell things and whatnot. But that's how they communicated. Many offers to share expenses to travel were in the classified ads, among other things, of course. And that's how they communicated for July 14th.
How did that communication work when placing a classified ad? Did the prisoner could call the paper?
Possibly call the paper, go to the newspaper, say, I want to put a classified ad. and it's some nondescript advertisement. They pay probably what we would call a very low cost fee and have that ad place newspaper, and then obviously the facilities receive newspapers, and inmates could look at the classified ads for their message.
That's wild. We actually had a conversation, a pre-interview conversation before, and this didn't come up. And I'm like fascinated by this. I think Tim is pretty fascinated by this. That this communication happened like kind of under the noses of all the guards. It's incognito like communication.
It was hidden right in front of everybody.
Wow.
And I think that classified ad has been published in the newspaper since.
Okay, so what happened when he got free? I understand he was with somebody else. What was their journey like?
So what we pieced together since that time and over the years is that once they made their escape, they made it from Lincoln to Nebraska, to Omaha, Nebraska, which is probably 50 or 60 miles apart. And Leslie, as he was most commonly referred to, called his friend, a neighborhood friend, a little bit older, and said, "Hey," and from what was reported to me is that he said that we escaped and I need a ride. He made a phone call from a payphone to his friend's house, and his friend was on a date that night, but did agree to come pick him up. And I've spoken to that person at the time, and they've confirmed that that was what happened. And also, I've interviewed the person he was on a date with, the friend that helped. And what he shared with me is that they picked him up, took him back to the house, made tuna fish sandwiches, and gave him some money. And he said he had approximately $40 that he could give him because he was home himself from college. But what was going on this day when I got the call? The girlfriend of the other person said that this was not what she was expecting to do that night on their date, but did remember these two guys, now known as the inmates, getting in the car, and that they, after the house, getting some food, the tuna fish sandwiches. And it always stood out to me that he specifically remembered tuna fish sandwiches. They drove to a train station in Iowa. But mind you, keeping Omaha, Nebraska, and Council Bluffs, Iowa, are just minutes apart. They border each other, and there was no trains coming anytime soon. So they ended up going back to the train station in downtown Omaha, and then ultimately getting on a bus to Chicago, and that's where the story parted ways for a long period of time. Of what we knew, we could show, but we did believe they went to Chicago. In fact, I will point out that at one point, many years ago, I was contacted by authorities in Chicago that maybe he became a victim of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer that was killing people, and often that came into the bus station in Chicago, and that maybe he fit that profile. Ultimately, obviously, that's not what happened, but that was an interesting phone call to receive, that maybe he was one of these victims that they later discovered.
Wow. Yeah. So what happens to your perspective on the investigation when you hear something like that?
Well, taking on a case like this, and obviously it wasn't my full-time case, it's something I did in conjunction with my other duties. But there was a lot of people, friends in law enforcement and others that I would talk to about the case, and many thought that Leslie had likely died, and then there was some thought, well, maybe he made it. There was just a mix of feelings of what happened. So keep in mind that Leslie escaped 5 years before I was born. So obviously he's got a huge head start. And so to what his life may have became, I had no idea at the time. And so we just kept doing interviews of anyone I could, wherever they were, or whenever possible, that may have known him, seen him, talked to him. And that includes the girlfriend from the night of making the request for the movies, to use the car to go to the drive-in. Ironically, the drive-in movie was The Undead. That was the movie being shown that night. It was The Undead with a double feature of No Time for Sergeants. So I can't imagine what he was thinking at a drive-in movie, watching that movie, knowing what he had just done hours earlier.
Yeah.
So this case has taken a lot of twists and turns, but ultimately it wasn't until a long time later that we got more answers.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Were there leads in the meantime that pointed you in different directions?
Sure. So ultimately, I was able to locate the parolee that helped in the escape, and he was interviewed by a detective in California when I was in Nebraska, and the detective contacted him. His memory wasn't the best. Obviously, he's a much older man at that point, and ultimately, he said that he did help him. He referred to him as the two boys. So I'm assuming he was an older inmate at the time that had paroled, but he remembered helping the two boys escape. Mentioned the classified ad, and that there was some discussion, but there was some memory issues that he had heard that they were in Chicago, but then he may have met up with them and they went into Canada. And the other inmate ultimately was captured in Los Angeles. But it was interesting for him to finally recall that he did help. He did help with getting them the items to help escape and whatnot, and the classified ad. So it was an interesting perspective so many decades later to hear his rough recollection, but recollection nonetheless. So other people that we've interviewed, there was talk that there were sightings. There was some similar names. In fact, one person had a very similar name with the exact same date of birth. For just quick appearances, looking at that person's driver's license, it was enough for us to go talk to him 4 states away. I'm like, what are the odds that he would keep a very similar name in the exact same date of birth and be living 4 states to the east? But we did go talk to him, and he actually he understood while we were there. It's not his favorite topic. It turns out he had been contacted by the FBI decades before that, but we didn't have a record of that at the time. But it was definitely a similar appearance and identical date of birth and a similar name. It was one of the ones like, this can't be, but you got to go check, because you have to check everything you can, because you don't know what's going to turn a case, and definitely you don't know what's going to turn a case, as we've learned.
You said that it wasn't his favorite topic to discuss. Was he like standoffish?
He was a little standoffish, but I think he had been contacted before. I thought he had a little bit of overreaction to being contacted, 30 years later. It's not like he was contacted every week. But again, I'm not in that person's shoes, and I wouldn't want to be accused as someone that was doing time for murder, let alone escape from prison. He was ultimately cooperative, of course. And we can show it wasn't him.
Did he have to give his DNA or something like that?
No, and that was obviously DNA technology. The advancements have been tremendous, more in the last few years than ever before. But we did fingerprinting at the time, just to be safe and be sure.
Right. And tell us about the DNA advancements and how that first started to change this case.
Well, I want to guess it was in 2008 or 2009. I reached out to the brother of Leslie, who's a man in his 70s himself, the younger brother, and ultimately got a DNA sample from him many, many years ago. He was a nice man, a cooperative person, willing to assist us. He shared some things with me, obviously about the case, because he was at his part-time job at the time that the murders happened, and then obviously he lost his parents, so he definitely shared his feelings about everything. But he was willing to help us. Gave us a DNA sample that we did submit and did run some tests on unidentified remains and other cases to see if maybe Leslie had died, and we didn't know no one who he was. That did not pan out. Some characteristic items came up at times just on our description, and not related to the DNA, but it being in the system, that remains were found, but nothing ever hit like that. But the brother was very nice to talk to. I have talked to him since several times. But the DNA technology then was excellent, but just the advancements even since that time to the last couple of years that's been used in other cases has just been exponential in cases to help. So I left Nebraska in 2013, and I relocated to California, and I continued in investigations. I stayed with the case unofficially. I had asked my supervisor, "Hey, can I look into this from time to time?" Because I didn't know who was going to pick it up. It was an old case. It was definitely cold, and he had no objections. To said, "Let us know if you find anything," of course. But I didn't know who was going to pick it up in its entirety and continue with it, if anybody, because it was so old. Especially, as I mentioned, it was the escape was 5 years before I was born, and now I'm in my 50s. So there's definitely a head start. So I worked on it from time to time. I would read about it. I would do some research on my own, and just to see what, try to put myself in his shoes, what he would have been facing. And one thing I found interesting is everything I've ever seen him in has been black and white. So I found myself thinking about what was available to him back then, and I started thinking about it in black and white, and how would he get identification? How would he get a social security card? The processes were much different in 1967, 68. You could get a social security card from what I learned at the post office with very little scrutiny. And so maybe that's one of the processes that he ultimately used. Nothing like the technology we have today for verifications and the requirements of documents. And many laws have changed to protect personal data, even within government services. So I don't think this could, I'll never say never, but I don't think this could be replicated in the manner in which he did it then. And staying with it for those years between 2013, just following up on my own curiosity to try to get an answer for this, I started tracking the Golden State Killer case in California, and discussions around ultimately what we learned is the use of DNA technology that had advanced. And in 2020, I reached out to the U.S. Marshal, and I thought there has to be a mechanism that maybe we could look at DNA again because of the advancements that had occurred in the years since. And I knew the U.S. Marshal from when I lived in Nebraska, and so he said that he would put someone in touch with me. And I can't remember how long later it was, but ultimately Deputy U.S. Marshal Matt Westover contacted my office. I've learned since, and Matt's a fantastic investigator, and he definitely took an interest to the case because obviously there's lots of twists and turns, and it's very interesting. But he shared with me he looked in the newspaper, and he saw this case that he went into, and it had some questions of why he had it on his roster because it's not a traditional case. I think it was listed as a murder 1958 on his roster. And so, and since the U.S. Marshal deals more with court security and fugitives, couldn't quite understand why he had it. But as he looked into it, he learned that, in fact, this case did surround a fugitive escaped from a prison, which definitely is in the interest and purview of the U.S. Marshal Service. And so from prior articles, he saw my name and saw that I was still in law enforcement in my current role, and reached out to me. And for the next 2.5 years, we talked regularly, times every week, discussing the case, research I had done, his ideas, and then ultimately Deputy Westover went and got more DNA from the brother, who was again cooperative, and they put that out and used with the cooperation of the brother, and then ultimately years later, in August 2022, there was a match, and that brings us to today, or at least several months ago, but publicly, here we are.
You said that the younger brother was cooperative with you and the U.S. Marshals, with Westover and with the DNA, but had he been cooperative from the start of everything? Well, I mean, from the murder on, was he always?
Well, from the murder on, he would have been a 12 or 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And he shipped off to live with family after the murders. So I can't speak until my contact with him in the early 2000s. And he was always very kind to me, understood why we were doing it, understood why we're still looking. And so then subsequently, when Matt Westover made contact with him, he got the same reception in more DNA. But now this time it can go to be used by better technology that we didn't have even 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So cool.
So in fact, I'll share when I met. He was known to be a musician. I think he dropped it for a period of time, but he was obviously into music. And there's pictures out there of him playing a saxophone. In fact, on one of my contacts with his girlfriend from high school, she still had one of his instruments from high school, and she said that she would have to look for it, but she ultimately gave it to me. And we tried to test it for DNA, and while we didn't get a match, DNA was present, but nothing at the time because it was just so long ago. But it was one of those opportunities like, well, maybe we can get DNA off the reed or within the instrument. But only that wasn't productive. But she didn't give it to us, and I ultimately, after we did our testing, I gave the instrument to Leslie's brother, because I think it needed to go basically back home.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so how surprised were you when you heard that there was a match made?
Well, when you've worked on something and thought about something for so long, even just in the last several years, just you're thinking about it and see what can be done. It's kind of surreal to learn that after all this time. So if I'm nearing 15 to 20 years of looking into this case or knowledge of it, and he escaped 5 years before I was even born, just so much time has passed, and to be told that there's a strong likelihood we found a familial relationship, I was floored. It's just, wow, there's an answer. And so then the investigation went on from there to now we could fill in the blanks of what happened from Chicago as best we could. That he ultimately got married and had a new identity within 130 days, I think, 134 days of his escape, which is phenomenally quick, in my opinion. But he did it, got a job, met a woman who had kids, single mom, became a stepdad. Then ultimately, I don't know the details of the end of that relationship, but he ended up meeting someone else and then having two kids of his own in later years, and then traveled around. And it's my understanding he was a traveling salesman of sorts, and then ultimately passed away in Australia in 2010. And then the only reason it came up is because his son had questions of, I've always told my dad was an orphan from Chicago, which interestingly is that's not a lie. He was an orphan. I mean, by his own doing. He orphaned himself, and he was in Chicago, but he had a life before that in Omaha, which included the killing of his own parents. So I'm confident that's what the son never expected to find when you're trying to find out more about your late father. But the family has shared with me, and I've spoken to his family several times, that he was a good father and he was a good provider. And that just wasn't their experience with him, but they're slowly coming to terms with what they've learned. And I have no impression that they had any of them, including Leslie's wife, had any knowledge. I just don't get that impression they had any knowledge just based on their reactions and the conversations we've had. So now they're processing what they did learn. You think you're going to find a long lost relative or find something connected to your dad's apparent adoption, and then you find out this, and then you see. I'm confident he looked at pictures that I shared with him, and the U.S. Marshal Service showed him in the newspapers that's his dad. So that's got to be a lot to process that I don't think any of us can appreciate. Finding that discovery when you're thinking one thing and you find something tragically different of a person you thought you knew very, very well. But I'm thankful to have learned that he was reported to be a good father and a good provider. And in many ways, and I've said this before, that I think he became the parent he wanted to be or he didn't have. And that's what he gave his children.
And was his son looking into this sort of concurrently while you were looking into it, and then you came together?
Well, in a lot of ways, yes. So it was the times that we were looking at it. He passed away in 2010. His son still would have himself been an adult at the time, and he wanted to learn more about his father. There's a very strong likelihood at times that when, at least I was looking into it, that his son was looking for him too, to learn more, of course, not him, to learn more about his past. And so I think that's always, I think about that from time to time of, we're both looking for the same person. We have two different ideas of who that person is. For me, it was a good reminder, ultimately, now that I've learned so much more about the case through all of this, is it changes your perspective. Everyone has a different perspective based on their experiences. And that's never been more true than this case. It's not his family's experience. So yes, he did a bad thing in his teen years, but I think if there was going to be an outcome, I think this is one of those outcomes that's just a blessing, all things considered, of what it could have been.
Wow. So do you have any knowledge on how he changed his identity when he got out of prison?
No, I know that the protocols or procedures to come up with an identity were much more lax and probably easier to do at that time. He did have a birth certificate that was clearly a fake birth certificate, and that's what he became. And he used that to create his identity and anchor himself to that identity. for the remainder of his life. So yeah, I don't know how he did it. I do know that it was on the basis of a fake birth certificate, but he was successful. And one thing I do know, and I've said this before, is he was a smart man. He was bright, and I don't think very few people could accomplish something like this. And again, I'm not discounting the murder of his parents in the least, but for someone to carry this level of baggage and personal experience and tragedy, obviously by his own doing, but it's a lot to carry and to keep clear. So he's not a. It was reported that he's a very smart man. He was a good salesman, but I can't imagine the road he was on all the time carrying that in his mind, because he cannot. He has to. You and I, any of us, we get stopped by the police for speeding or whatnot. Imagine what goes through his head on just a simple police contact throughout his whole life. That could be the police arrive to the neighbors to take a report of vandalism. He doesn't know, looking out the window, if they're there for him, because he's carrying this criminal history with him that's been unresolved.
Do you think that was part of the reason why, or most of the reason why, he ended up in Australia?
Australia creates a great distance from his past. I do know he moved around quite a bit, and possibly many times unexplained to his family, but they moved as a family. But Australia is pretty far away, and probably maybe that helped him mentally to be that distance from his past, because obviously he wasn't living in Nebraska and did move around quite a bit, but he has to carry that and figure out what he's going to do to remain successfully on the run and ultimately accomplish that. But I think he went far away, both for mental reasons as well as to avoid capture, if that was the case.
Did you have a thought on where you thought he would have been before finding out where he ended up? Did you have any theories?
Well, there was, I often thought that he probably went out of the country. Initially, I learned that he may have went to Canada for a period of time, but I thought he may have gone to South America. There was conversations that that's where he would go. The source or the validity of those things that we had learned, I'm not clear on, because some of them predate me, but also South America, Brazil, whatnot. Wouldn't surprise me if he went out of the country, maybe to a country that doesn't have extradition. I do recall someone did search for my name in Google, and with my full name and with the title of investigator and the IP address of that search, I created an alert at that time because I was tracking it, and that IP address came back to South America. So who did that search, and why is someone searching for me down there? That's be a remarkable coincidence. But also, I also looked at searches done on the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services website to see if anyone ever looked him up. I know I looked him up on the website, and anybody can do it. It's a publicly accessible. Then I wondered, okay, did anyone search for him? So I could see where I searched for him over the years, and just to look at information. In that system at the time, you could search for inmates by just the inmate number that they're assigned when they come to prison, or by their name. And they'll give you a roster of anyone with that name or similar name and their corresponding crimes, county of commitment, etc. I was able to look at the searches. Someone looked them up just by inmate number. So it made me think that if you're going to look them up by inmate number, you're probably one of two people. You're either him, because who else knows his number but him? Every inmate knows their inmate number. Or me, someone looking for him, or someone in an official capacity that's looking for him that would know that. Because otherwise, because there was no prior searches of just his name to then tell you the number. Someone searched strictly with his number on their first search, and that IP address at the time came back out of the country to South America. So when I combined those two, it made me think, okay, how is this possible? Both, in my opinion, most coincidences are well planned. And the fact that someone's searching by inmate number and by my name, all out of the country in similar locations. So that's me. Maybe it was him. Maybe that's where he was traveling at the time. I don't officially know that he was there or not, but I do find those searches interesting.
That's really interesting. What year was that?
2009, 2010, but prior to his death. Oh, well, now enough to be his death.
When did he move to Australia?
I don't have that date. I don't recall it off the top of my head. I think it was after 9/11 that he remained out of the country. It was told to me that he traveled much, much less after 9/11. So I think he's out of the country at that time.
I guess I was wondering if it was like a stopover before going to Australia, but it seems like that'd be too long of a duration.
Yeah, I didn't look much further into that in the later years, but that definitely stood out to me that he very well could have been there. Or maybe he did searches. I went as far as to think maybe he did searches using a virtual private network, a VPN of sorts. Because I always felt that he was a smart person, that maybe he thought of that in those years to mask that so he could go look something up and try to have some sort of anonymity.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a little bit unbelievable to think that he bounced around to different countries and moved around in the country so seemingly kind of easily after changing his identity. He had relationships. I don't know. It seems like a crazy skill to be able to blend in like that and just restart your life.
Well, he obviously had great success at doing it for him. Obviously, his life depended on it. So he probably made very strategic decisions to avoid detection all those years. I think it had to be quite a burden, but yeah, his life depended on it.
He never reached out, as far as you know, or no suspicion that he reached out to his younger brother in all those years?
No indication of that, even though I have asked his brother if they've had contact, and he said no. His brother always seemed very forthright with me and a honest and decent person to me to this day. But no other knowledge of him reaching back into his prior life is known to me, or others for that matter, that I'm aware of.
And does it seem to you that he would be doing this or not doing this in order to protect the person that would receive the information?
Well, I think it's both. He could have been very well been a protective older brother. And if you take the position that maybe he had an adverse relationship with his parents, maybe he was protecting his brother. Maybe he's preserving himself and decided that if I'm going to be successful at this, I can never reach back into my prior life. And that could be a reason. There's all sorts of reasons for not crossing back over. And ultimately, it's obvious that he was successful because while he did technically die on the run, he was fully invested in a new life. So he had success.
I know you're law enforcement, but is there a part of you that admires him for eluding capture for so long and through so many generations?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that was posed to me by the reporter from the Omaha Herald, Henry Cordes, once. And I was quoted as saying that the police officer in me early on wanted to find him, locate him, and bring him back on the escape charges and let him face justice back in Nebraska. As I got into later years, the more I thought about it and wondered what his life could have been if he was still alive at all, or what became of him. There was times I thought to myself, well, I just want to know where he's at, or how did he do this, or is he gone? So I can't say I have admiration. I will say that I'm mildly impressed that he was able to avoid capture. And basically, from a modern technology perspective, he started out at a time with no technology. And he was able to successfully integrate his created life into a world that we know now of computers and technology that's used to track people all the time. Just the mere act of getting a bank account or a driver's license, I think we take for granted. And he was able to navigate from a time period that has had much less restrictions, and much easier to accomplish getting identification or other government documents, to a time when now it's very difficult. So I think he was at least bright, definitely a smart man in my opinion, and he was successful. And so I have I just won't say admiration because, but I sit back and go, well, he did it. I give him credit, he did it. But I don't know the negative impact on his life that he kept to himself. Obviously, he didn't share it with his family, but I'm sure this had to have great stress on him mentally, physically, emotionally, you name it. I'll never know those answers. I think that's something he will carry on with word. And now that he's passed, that's it. That's his.
How far, in your opinion, do you think a prison escapee from Nebraska might get today?
I'll never say that someone can't escape a prison, because the moment I do, someone's going to do it, right? I think technically to do it, I don't think anyone will be as successful as he was, but I can't say it could never happen. But the safeguards in place are quite extensive. But to fully disappear, I just think it's incredibly difficult nowadays. I think he was of that generation where if you were going to do it, that was the last time you could probably have that success. Because ultimately, you're probably on camera. I can't say about you guys. You guys could be on camera all the time. But I think just a regular citizen, member of the public, is on camera several times a day without knowing it. Banks, surveillance cameras, home cameras. Whoever thought that cameras would be in all the homes, or many homes at least, everywhere we go. We're probably on cameras countless times a day and never know it. So the technology advances exist. I think it would just be so tough for an inmate. They might be able to escape, but to remain on the run could be tough, because you'd have to have the mindset that he had. You could never reach back and touch that prior life, because you don't know who, if you do that, who might talk. Or maybe the authorities are already in those locations, thinking just in case if someone currently escaped, they're making contact to find out if you reach back at all. I think it'd just be tough to do it nowadays. But I'll never say anything's impossible.
Has this lit a fire under you as far as seeing something through for so many years and being instrumental in the conclusion of it? Are you looking into anybody else now?
No, and I've been asked that a few times. I think it's one that, based on the ending and the amount of time put into it, but not only the amount of time just by me alone, which is since 2004 at least, the present time I've worked on it, but there's been countless other agencies, the Omaha Police Department, the Nebraska State Patrol, the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, intel services such as MOCIC. So many people are involved along the way. I think I'm going to let this one rest. This is a good place for my interest in it. It's not my primary jurisdiction anymore. I commend anyone who tries to investigate cold cases like this, and I hope the technology is out there to help them solve their cases. But to get back into another case, that'd be tough for me at this point. But I'm thankful to everyone along the way that helped, contributed, and I'm especially thankful currently to the U.S. Marshal Service for taking this case into the end zone ultimately.
It's such a great story to hear, and I'm sure you didn't expect it to conclude the way it did, by learning about this individual and learning that he was a family man, and his kids are even saying he was a good provider.
Right.
And then you have to come to terms with, well, maybe he wasn't just all bad. Maybe it was just one moment, and he ended up living the life he needed to live, or he should have lived.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you. I think that's spot on. I do think he became the parent that he wanted. I was very happy to hear reports of him being a good person and good experiences with his family. It's a good outcome. I mean, I was asked a couple times of, hey, had you found him alive, you'd have to arrange to have him brought back, and that's something obviously that the U.S. Marshal Service would have handled. But just thinking of bringing back this man, if he was found, just years earlier, and the disruption to that life again, not his life, because that's his burden to carry, in my opinion, to be brought back to justice, but the impact on the family. And as I mentioned before, my perspective on this has changed quite a bit to remind myself that yes, that was the crime, and that he got his penalty. He didn't serve out his penalty, but this is an outcome I didn't expect, to learn of who he became. But what I would want him to have brought back in later years, not knowing what I know now, no. I think the closure was the closure that was meant to be, because I don't know if there would have been true justice value to bring him back if he was found alive.
Who's going to play you in the movie?
Well, I don't know about any movies, but it's definitely a fascinating story that's gotten some interest. And there's just so many moments in this that were just so interesting along the way. And I'm thankful for those friendships, and I look forward to how the story is told.
It's remarkable. Now you're saying, you're thankful for the friendships. You would have never made these friends had this guy not killed his parents at 16, gone to prison, and 9 years later escaped successfully.
That is absolute fact.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. It's also weird to think that had he not killed his parents, escaped from prison, that I wouldn't be talking to his son.
Right.
His son wouldn't exist if those bad things didn't happen decades ago. So the things that had to line up for a lot of people's to just merely exist, let alone relationships that have stemmed from it, are all remarkable to me.
This guy deserves an award, let alone...
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of people were involved, and a lot of things wouldn't happen had these bad things not happened. But I think that's what we learn about life. Things happen. I'm thankful for the outcome, and I consider his his family. I consider them very close to me, and I would consider them friends. And we have had good conversations, and I'm thankful for the outcome that we got ultimately. And we have closure, and there's resolution. And now I think that the process begins for his family to process the new information over time and go on. And I've said this to the family: you got to focus on your memories, your experiences with this person, and don't focus on his first life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Well, Geoff, thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate your time and your energy for this story. I mean, what a cool story to work on and to finally see through all the way to the end.
No, I appreciate both of you very much for your approach to this, and I've appreciated how you went through it, and you're looking at all aspects of a case, and you're open to the fact that he ultimately did have a family, and they have their points of view, and you guys have been very kind. So I thank you both.